Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. For a first-time candidate, Vikram Mansharamani managed to be competitive in last cycle's GOP Senate primary, picking up about 10,000 votes or 8%. He wants to build on that total as he now seeks New Hampshire's 2nd congressional district seat, and he's our guest this morning on Close Up. Vikram, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So this is the 2nd cycle in a row you've put yourself to the test of the voters. Senate's a big deal. The House these days is a little bit of a less desirable property. You see a lot of longtime members sort of fleeing for the hills, tired of the dysfunction that they see in D.C. So A, why do you want to serve in the House? And B, what can you do to assure voters here in New Hampshire that you want to be part of the solution and not part of adding to those fire and flames of dysfunction?
Sure. Well, Adam, let's all admit Washington is dysfunctional. It's a mess. We all know that. We all feel that. And what we want is a fighter to go down there to help fix this mess, someone who will represent New Hampshire. And the issues I care deeply about are all federal issues. So there aren't many jobs for me in New Hampshire to go after to represent New Hampshire in Washington. So it's either the U.S. Senate or the House. And so my goal is really to go down there to do 3 things, focus on 3 major topics. One, the economy. We all know inflation is affecting every family. Families across the Granite State are really feeling the pinch. Higher gas prices, higher food prices. We're worried about what heating oil prices are going to be. Electricity prices. I've talked to families that are worried about and say they can't afford to send their children to camp this summer. This is not what our government should be doing to us. And let's agree, inflation is a cause of a lot of this pain, but it's because of government action. We've borrowed too much, we've spent too much, and we continue this problem, right? So that's the other issue, to stop it. Secondly, the border. We know the border is a problem. And so I believe in a tall wall and a wide gate. We need to secure that border first and foremost, and then once we do, we can talk about immigration reform. So I'm a believer in immigration. My parents were immigrants to this country. I believe we are made stronger as a nation, as an economy, by having immigrants, but we have to have a secure border first. So that's it. And then lastly, we need to restore strength, American strength abroad. That will make the world safer. A weak America is actually producing an unsafe world.
You mentioned being a fighter. In Congress, you have people who are grabbing a lot of headlines like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz. So would you be in that mold, or are you going to be sort of on the team with Speaker Johnson?
Well, so first of all, I'm an independent thinker, and I'm going to represent one party and pledge loyalty to one party and one party only, and that is the voters of the 2nd Congressional District. And I'm going to work with whoever I need to get stuff done. That's the goal. Now, we may need to fight to get stuff done, but I'm not a disruptor. I'm not going to go down to Washington to improve this sense of chaotic teamship. I don't want to play that partisan politics. I want to play towards progress to get this country back on the right track. That's my goal. There's lots of common ground. We need to find that common ground and work to improve the lives of Granite State families.
A lot of Republicans I talked to in the 2nd District are kind of narrowing down their choice. They see this as either you or Lily Tang Williams. If you're talking to a conservative and they say, why should I choose you, Vikram, over Lily, what do you tell them?
Well, a couple things. One, I do have a lot of global experience, and this is a world that actually does matter. Number 2, I have tons of business experience. I've signed the front of paychecks, not just the back of them. And I think that's important for someone going down to D.C. And then number 3, I think we really do need someone who's got that deliberative, consensus-building approach to focus on effective policy that actually does stuff for Granite State families. Look, I've spent time teaching, reading, writing, and helping companies think about trends and dynamics such as inflation. There's a recipe of how you produce inflation. And so let's undo that recipe to get rid of the inflation. And those are things I feel completely comfortable with and believe I have a unique set of skills to offer here.
Obviously, there was a big headline coming out of this last week with the convictions against former President Trump down in New York. First, just your reaction to the guilty verdicts.
Yeah, so, Adam, it's really disappointing to me on so many fronts. But the main reason it's disappointing is this was a political process. We had a district attorney who ran for office on the idea he would go after Trump. So that's number 1. Number 2, we have look, I'm not a legal scholar, but these were misdemeanors that had passed a statute of limitations that were revived and turned into felonies. We've had, the jury chosen from a pool that was 90% plus in favor of Biden, i.e. against the defendant. Just smacks of a lot of political dynamics at work here rather than justice. Look, I am a believer no one is above the law. Let's admit that. But no one should be below the law either. The law should be applied objectively. Normally, what America does is we say, hey, here's some alleged crime. The justice system will prosecute that regardless of who the defendant is. In this case, we started with the defendant and then found the prosecutable crime. It's backwards. Like, this doesn't feel good to me. And so I am confident that the rule of law in America works. I have faith. And so I believe this appeals process will now go forward, and we'll see what happens.
Obviously, the DA is an elected position, but you're saying the jury. You think the jury was politically tainted?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it was drawn from a pool that we know was 90% in favor of Biden. It was drawn from Manhattan. Right? We know that jury of peers, that the sort of pool from which the jurors were drawn, were disproportionately likely to be sympathetic to Biden, disproportionately antagonistic to Trump.
Yeah, you supported Nikki Haley in the First in the Nation primary and were a very vocal supporter of hers. Obviously, she's not the nominee, but is this the kind of situation you were hoping to avoid when you endorsed her?
Well, I endorsed Nikki Haley for a lot of reasons, mainly the foreign affairs logic, which I think is really important. She's been a fighter for American interests abroad. But look, Nikki's not the nominee. At this point, it's President Trump. And so I've been a lifelong Republican, and I plan to vote Republican.
Republicans say this is an unfair weaponization of the justice system, not just this case, but the others as well. Would it also be an unfair weaponization of the justice system if Trump is reelected and then decides to go after then former President Biden and his family?
Sure. I think that would be an unfair weaponization of the justice system. But let's remember what President Trump did, Adam, when he was elected in 2016. He was asked to go after Hillary Clinton. He said that's not what we're going to do. We need to bring the country back together. So I don't know what President Trump will do if he's reelected. I do know what he did do when he was elected.
If you're on Capitol Hill representing the 2nd Congressional District, what abortion legislation, if any, are you willing to support in Congress?
So I do believe it's a state's issue. I do believe New Hampshire has figured this out correctly, Adam. I think it represents what the will of the people is in New Hampshire. It's got a lot of common ground. It is a ban on the 3rd trimester with a couple of exceptions, obviously fatal anomalies, health of the mother. But I don't think it's a federal issue. If it does become a federal issue, as I've said before to you, I'm okay with representing the New Hampshire interests in a federal bill. And that means banning the 3rd trimester and codifying before.
So then, for instance, if Speaker Johnson says you got the majority and it's, Republican Senate and President Trump in the White House, if he says, hey, Vikram, we've got a 15-week ban. We know you said 24, but can you get to 15?
I'm not sure I would understand what that means explicitly, Adam, in terms of the dynamics that work.
A 15-week federal abortion ban. That's Senator
So that's
Lindsey
tighter
Graham's
than New
bill.
Hampshire feels comfortable with, right?
And so you'd be a no.
Are you going to codify it before 15 weeks? I mean, we can get into hypothetical legislation here and talk about a ban. I'm saying if we're going to do something on one end, we need to make sure we're going to do the other side. I don't want Granite State families thinking this is the beginning of a ban that gets tighter and tighter and tighter, because that's not what anyone wants. I also don't want to feel like we're codifying one and increasing to the point where there are no bans. I want to find that middle ground that works for most people. This is an issue that is politicized by politicians and the media, less so by Granite State families that I've talked to. This middle ground of what New Hampshire has found seems to work. We have far more important issues, right? We have the economy, we have the border, we have what's happening in the world. I want to focus on those.
Just to be clear, so you're saying you could consider and negotiate around that 24-week ban, but you'd want to see an affirmative codifying of abortion rights up to wherever the ban is?
If it becomes a federal issue, that's right.
Okay. Do you support continued aid to Ukraine? This has obviously become a very touchy subject on the Republican side.
Yeah, so I'm not in favor of endless wars or blank checks, Adam. I really am not. I'm there to stop the spending and to control the inflation, to live within our means. And let's remember, we're borrowing for every dollar we send to Ukraine. That is de facto what's happening. Now, with that said, America first does not mean America alone. I do want to support Ukraine. I want to see Russia lose in that world. And I'm happy to consider support, but not blank checks. We can't give them arms and money and then say you can't use it to fire at the Russians over the border that are amassing to come in and kill Ukrainians. You can't have their arms tied behind their back at the same time that we're supporting them. So if we're supporting them, let's do it with some game plan. We need an end game. This can't turn into an endless war. And so the answer is yes, I'm willing to support allies, but not with blank checks, not without accountability, and not with making them tie one of their hands behind their back when they're in that fight.
You mentioned earlier you want to cut energy costs for Granite Staters. Obviously, you look at our region right now, the states surrounding us, Vermont, Massachusetts, also sort of New York plays a role in this too when you talk about pipelines. It's hard to see those states politically getting to the point where they're going to allow any kind of transmission of fossil fuels now or in the future. So what is your plan to get lower energy costs for that quarter or so of New Hampshire households who rely on natural gas to heat their homes?
Well, so first thing we got to do is stop the green energy plans that are spending money inefficiently, Adam. That's number one, right? We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars to subsidize electric vehicles, which, let's be honest, electric vehicles don't produce energy. They're storage devices, right? So you may in fact be driving a coal-fired vehicle. So that's not helpful, right? So we need to stop the spending in inappropriate ways. That will allow for spending in more appropriate ways, which is let's actually focus on nuclear. Let's figure out other energies that could work, that could provide A, clean, reliable energy, but B, that's not dependent on foreign countries that hate us and can provide us regular low-cost energy.
All right, Vikraman Sharmani, thanks for joining us on Close Up, and we'll see you out there on the trail.
Great. Thanks for having me, Adam.
All right.